Okay, that's a good distinction too. So pagan says there is no God, secular says I am God.
So a secularist is a non-theist.
Okay. What about, okay, right. So you could say that paganism believes in some sort of deity, whereas a secular person believes in no deity. Okay, those are all great, and I think those definitions are true. Let me give you a definition of secular that I think will help for the discussion here. I'm not saying that what you have said is wrong. I think you're actually correct. Secularism has a wide variety of meanings. But I'm going to define secular for our purposes today as being post-Christian. Being post-Christian. Now, it distinguishes itself from paganism because paganism is pre-Christian, right? A pagan person has never heard the gospel, ostensibly. And so they haven't had a chance to reject Christianity. A secular person has heard the gospel, he has heard Christianity, and has now rejected it. All right, let me give you an example of what I mean. There's a guy that I work with, or used to work with, and we discussed philosophy. He held to some weird New Age Eastern view. I couldn't even articulate it if I tried. But we discussed philosophy and talked about worldviews, and after maybe 6 months of discussion, I decided to invite him to church one day. I thought it would be fun. I said, why don't you just come to my church and see how the other half lives? You might get a kick out of it. I just wanted to get him in the door so he can hear the gospel clearly. So he didn't respond for a day. We did it as an email, and he sent me email back the following day, and what he said was very telling. He said, I don't need to, he'd never been in a Christian evangelical church as far as I know, but his response was, I don't need to go to your church to find out about Christianity because I already know what it's all about, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Okay, so his response was, I've been there, I've done that. I grew up in a Christian nation, quote unquote. I use that term loosely. And so he knew what Christianity was all about before even listening to the propositions of Christianity. Okay, and that's what it means, as far as I understand it, to be secular. Okay, he's rejected Christianity outright. I've been there, I've done that. I don't need to hear what you have to say. Let me give you some formal definitions. This one's by James Turner. And by the way, I want to recommend a book to you. I'm going to be able to cover this history very, very briefly. James Turner in a book called Without God, Without Creed. It's published by Johns Hopkins University Press. I think it's a 93 publication. He does a great job of talking about why we are in the situation we're in. The subtitle is The Origins of Unbelief in America. James Turner, T-U-R-N-E-R. And by the way, I had some bibliographies. I didn't expect the response in the first day yesterday, and I don't have any more copies. But if you want a bibliography, I have a full bibliography with where I rate the different books. I give you a little blurb about what it's about, and then I tell you if it's a beginner, intermediate, or advanced reading. I can email that to you or mail it to you. My information's at the back of your handout. So please let me know if you want that. I list about 50 books, so it's a pretty thorough bibliography if you're interested in that. But James Turner said this about secularism, and this is bringing out some more of the aspects of what secular means. He says, secularization implies the separation of religious from worldly concerns, and therefore of God's realm from the everyday world that man inhabits. Okay, and some of you pointed that out, I think. It's a separation of God's realm of influence from man's. J.P. Moreland said this, secular is having little or no understanding of a Christian way of seeing the world. Okay, so it rejects Christianity, and then it doesn't allow Christian ideas to influence the way that the secular world presents itself. Okay, nor does it see the Christian worldview as an important participant in the way we as a society frame and debate issues in the public square. Okay, and most of us experience this every day. We look at the newspapers, we look at television. Christianity and Christian ideals are entirely excluded for the most part. And again, there are exceptions. There are good things happening in certain areas. But generally, this is what we see. That's what secular means. All right, so we see results of secularization all over the place. Let me give you two examples. An individual, a friend of mine, wrote a letter to a union that he's a part of, and he's part of a teachers union. And he tried to present the idea that there actually was a right and wrong way to do school for kids, and that the Bible teaches certain things about what is right and wrong, and we should adopt the Bible's view because he believes it's right. Now, if we believe something's right, we're not going to present it wishy-washy, right? We're not going to say, well, maybe it's true. We're going to say, this is the way God has determined things to go, and that's how we're going to present our view, right? I mean, typically. So here's how the union responded. He said, your letter stresses your religious beliefs and implies that these beliefs should be the rule in our public school, which is how we'd expect him to write it. One purpose of this coalition is to prevent a single religious belief from being fostered in our multicultural society. I like that term? We have many members who describe themselves as being from religious backgrounds. We also have members that reject the existence of a God. The New York State Teachers Union takes no position at all, but instead tries to help every member have tolerance for all. Okay, now you see what's going on here. They say, we're not going to accept this idea of that you're trying to present because it's just one idea among many. And what we actually find in practice is that religious ideas are rejected outright. Right? If you say it's a religious view, you're not even allowed to present it.
No position is a position.
Right.
Well, a Christian view as opposed to secular humanism.
Sure. And
which is a form of religion.
Yeah, it would be interesting to write out the properties of a religion and see how many of them apply to Christian or to a secular mindset. I mean, religion has certain things that make it a religion, right? A belief in something transcendent. We could imply that, or we could see secularization as having a belief in something transcendent, even though they wouldn't word it that way. But that's a good point. It's a really good point. Let me give you one other example. We see secularization showing its head in what I call radical naturalism. Radical naturalism, and this is a rejection of transcendence. Okay. People like Steven Pinker at MIT and Peter Singer at I think it's Harvard, they are taking evolutionary theory to its moral extreme. Now I'm going to relate a little story to you, and I don't tell you the story to shock you. It's going to shock you, but I don't tell it to you for the purpose of shocking you. I tell it to you because this is the direction that we're going as far as the culture goes and as far as the university goes. Now the examples I'm giving are from professors that are teaching at Ivy League world-class universities like MIT and Harvard. So this isn't some article I picked up off the back of the paper and I'm going to read it to you because I think it has shock value. Okay, I think this is going to become more and more mainstream. People like Pinker and Peter Singer are arguing now that personhood and being a human person is degreed. Okay, so you can be more or less of a human person, and they define humanness in terms of your functional states by what you do. So maybe a full person, if you're a 100% person, you have the ability to walk, you have the ability to communicate, you have the ability to reason, you have a certain level of IQ, all right? And then it starts to go down from there, okay? You understand what I'm saying? Humanness is degreed, and it's defined in terms of functional states. So what they're arguing then is that an infant is not a person. Okay? An infant is not a human person. Therefore, we shouldn't look at mothers who infanticide their infants because we shouldn't look at them as monsters because really they're not really killing a human person. They're just killing some kind of an entity that is non-human. All right? And Pinker actually argues that we should allow mothers, not allow them, but we should not prosecute mothers who kill their infants within the first 6 months of age. Okay, and this argument is being accepted by certain pockets. Peter Singer goes even further, and he says we should allow mothers to infanticide their children up to 2 years of age. Okay, because his view of what it means to be a functional person is different than Steven Pinker's. Now you understand what I'm saying to you. Okay, this view that abandons the idea of a metaphysic or of a soul, they're taking their evolutionary theory to its logical extreme. All right, and this is what secularization means. Now, you and I as Christians, we believe that our humanness is tied to what? It's tied to our soul, right? Our humanness is tied to who we are as a person, which is different than our physical body. So our soul is what makes us human, not our body or our functional states. And on that idea, if the soul exists at conception, then the soul is what makes you human, and you are human from the moment of conception, right? Regardless of what you can do. So you see the Christian idea has been totally chucked based for this naturalistic idea. And this is an example of secularization.
What happens too is they already view that people with a Christian worldview are mentally unstable or damaged goods when they apply that line of thinking to that model.
And what you're bringing up is who makes the rules? Who defines what functional states are human and not human? Right? It becomes almost subjective.
This goes a long way back because I got a copy of a speech given by a medical officer in the Canadian Army at the end of World War II, in which he said that anybody raised in a Christian home is mentally screwed up, and this is to other psychologists and psychiatrists, we need to correct this. This is 1946.
Right. And that's not an unpopular idea these days. Defining dysfunction from a naturalistic worldview is going to be very interesting. What does it mean to be dysfunctional? Yeah.
But the funny thing is we do this and we look at it real brief. So you take somebody like Governor Ventura, who ranked on the Christians but did not rank on the Muslims or the Jewish people. It seems to be they're ranking on the Christians because the Christians, in their mind's eye, stand in the way of things that they would like to change.
Right. And really they're fighting against our heritage, right? Because Christianity has been around for a long time. It's an easy target. But that's a good observation. All right, so this is the situation we find ourselves in which we find ourselves. Sorry for the bad grammar there. And I want to paint a picture of why this actually happened. What was the situation that brought this about? Primarily, three things happened. Two areas of influence caused this situation to come about, and then the church did something that I think was a mistake historically. Now let me talk about the two areas of influence that caused the situation to come about. The first area was that of philosophy. Around the time of David Hume and Immanuel Kant, these guys were starting to pitch certain views about knowledge. Okay, there was a change in the way that people looked at knowledge. Prior to Locke and Hume and Kant, people simply believed that they knew things, and they could know. There were simple things that they could know. For instance, that they existed, that there was something transcendent to the human person, to the body, that could exist. Right? They believed that if there were cause-effect relationships in the world, that they always held. For instance, if I held something up and I dropped it and it fell, I could trust that cause-effect relationship held all the time. Well, what Locke and Hume and Kant did, when they came along, and they started questioning all these things. Okay, Kant taught us that you can't know anything beyond the physical world. Anything beyond the five senses is not knowable. Okay, and he had a very complex argument for why that was true. David Hume questioned the reliability of sense perception and the reliability of cause-effect relationships. Hume argued something like, the only reason we believe in cause-effect relationships is because they've always held that way. So the only reason we believe that a ball is going to fall out of my hand when I drop it is because it's always fell to the ground when I've dropped it. But there's no guarantee that the next time I drop the ball, it's going to float in midair. That it's not going to float in midair. There's no guarantee that it's not going to fly upward. So the only reason we believe that the cause-effect relationship holds is because that's the way it's always been. But we can't be sure, we can't be certain, that can't be an area of knowledge because it may not happen that way next time. And there's no guarantee. Now, some of you are looking at me like, that's ridiculous. and the way I'm presenting it, of course I have to do it very quickly, but the point isn't whether or not you buy the argument. The point is that the universities bought it. Okay, and they picked up on this idea that knowledge things that we normally took as knowable were no longer knowable. Okay, and so we have this dichotomy now. The only thing that we can know is what we experience with our five senses. Things that we normally took as guaranteed knowledge now are being called into question. Now, at the same time, science was making extreme headway in areas that were very practical to people. Okay, for instance, science was producing things like aspirin and medical advances, and what people that normally would have believed in God, what they were doing is seeing these advances. They would say, well, I can go to my minister and he prays for me when I'm sick or I have a headache, and I only get better, maybe 50% of the time. But if I take this aspirin, my headache always goes away. And they started seeing these relationships, and science was really doing a lot for people, giving them creature comforts. If I break my arm, science is the hospital, the doctor can set my arm and gangrene doesn't set in and I don't lose my arm. That's amazing. Whereas if I go to the church, the minister prays for me, but most of the time people end up dying. Okay, so science was making these great advances, and they were showing people that we can control the world. We can overcome death by being too cold, by giving people heat, and running water and all these kinds of things. And science was doing a tremendous amount in this period, and showing people that they can actually tame the world. Plus, Darwin comes along, And he was providing answers for things that only previously the church was providing answers for, namely where we came from, how we got here. Right? He provided a theory, even though at the time the theory was flatly rejected by most scientists. Did you know that? Evolution, when it was first pitched, was not even viable. But he presented an idea that made it possible to explain how we got here. So now, science is taking away the authority of the church to explain even that. Now science can provide us a means by which we can explain how we got here. What left is there for the church to do? There was very little left for the church to do except to provide comfort, provide emotional healing for the grieving. And if what psychologists tell us is true, even that's going away, right? You can take drugs now to get rid of your depression. You don't need the church for that anymore. So the church slowly started losing its cultural authority and its influence, and science took over. Now, the fact that this was happening, really, the church could have dealt with it, right? The church could have dealt with it. They could have said, "Yeah, this is happening, but we need to overcome this because this is not true. What science is telling us, even though it's wonderful, is not giving us the full answer." But instead, the church did something that I think was critical. The church internalized and it privatized. Okay, it couldn't deal with the arguments that were being presented. It couldn't deal with the onslaught of science. And so what it did, instead of trying to change the university and argue against the scientists, it went off and started seminaries. Okay, did you know that as Princeton started to go more liberal and abandon fundamental Christianity, Westminster Seminary was started as a response to that. So what happened was all the Christian professors at Princeton left Princeton and started Westminster. Now who's left at Princeton to fill the gaps? The secular, right? The secular individuals. And so now Princeton goes fully liberal. And the Christians, who attends Westminster? Are secular people, the power people in the culture, going to attend Westminster? No, Christians are going to attend Westminster because they're running away from Princeton. All right? And Princeton was already a very powerful school. So you have Princeton teaching science, which was already very much accepted in the culture, Westminster teaching theology, which was being slowly eroded away in the culture. And so now Princeton becomes a cultural authority, and they're the primary leaders to whom the culture looks. You see the situation, how this whole picture comes together. So all these things were happening at once. So the advance of science, the propagation of certain philosophies, and the privatization of the church all contributed to our current situation. All right, they all contributed to our current situation. Now, there's much more to be said on this, and I'm going to defer you to Turner to fill in the gaps. Another book, by the way, that I'll recommend is Moreland's Love Your God with All Your Mind, and he deals with some of that in this book as well. This is another fine volume. Okay? All right, I've got just a few minutes left, and I want to talk about a solution. Okay? In 7 minutes. What can we do? Okay? Do we wring our hands and say, well, we're in big trouble, the secularists are going to win, we have nothing to say? What do we do to solve the problem? I think there are two primary areas that we as a church need to concentrate on. And you folks, as educators, I think are pivotal. Okay? You folks are the ones that are going to actually change the world. And that's why I count it as a great privilege to be able to talk to you this afternoon. But what can we do as a church? First of all, we need to develop a vibrant, robust, caring community, Christian culture, out of which we can affect change. Okay? That means we need to do things to develop community in our churches. We need to cultivate a people that care about one another, that care about each other's needs, that are concerned for our well-being, both intellectually and physically. And we need to work hard to develop this in our people. All right? Let me tell you, folks, community is not going to happen on Sunday mornings. Okay? If your church people and the people you work with are just relying on Sunday mornings for community, it's not going to happen. Okay? Community happens when you get together outside of church and you meet together to be real and talk about real concerns that people have. All right? You can't develop community on 2 hours on a Sunday morning. And that means that you're going to have to open your homes up. That means you're going to have to invite people in for dinner that you may not know or that you want to get to know. That means you're going to have to find out what needs exist and help meet those needs. All right? So what I'm talking about now is developing a community out of which we can affect change. And that community has to be tightly knit and tightly bound together. All right? The second thing then is that we need to return to a high commitment to the development of the life of the mind. We need to return to a high commitment to the development of the life of the mind. This means that we need to really beef up our Christian education. All right? Right now, the church, primarily what happens in Christian education is that people get together to talk about how to help their family situation, how to raise kids. Now, that stuff's good. That's important. All right? It is important. But we need to go beyond that in our Christian education programs. We need to provide people with a rigor where we're teaching them about theology. We're teaching them about the soul. Okay, what does it mean to have a soul? How does the soul function in your worldview? What does the incarnation mean? Can you articulate the incarnation? And teaching people how to articulate what the incarnation is all about. Teaching people how to deal with a situation where someone says that the material world is all there is. How do we deal with that statement? How do we help people to talk about transcendence? We need to be offering classes like that. We need to be offering classes for people in specific disciplines to better integrate their worldview with their discipline. For instance, if you're a Christian nurse, we need to be having Sunday school classes that talk about how to integrate your Christian worldview with your nursing. Or if you're a homemaker, or if you're a computer programmer, or if you're a ditch digger. How does your Christian worldview integrate with what you do for a living? Maybe if your church has a lot of Christian nurses, you want to have a course in bioethics and talk about how bioethics, how the situations they're facing regarding bioethics can be dealt with from a Christian perspective. What is the ethical thing to do when you have a patient who's terminally ill and on a life support system? How do you think about that from a Christian perspective? And we need to be providing our people with a means and a grounds for thinking about these things from a Christian worldview. And then, like I said at the very beginning of the seminar, our defense of the faith comes out of that. So we need to return to a high commitment to the life of the mind, and from that, our defense will come. Now, I apologize. I've had to summarize so much here. I can't get into any real depth on any of these issues, and that's unfortunate. But I want to leave here. I want to do two things. First of all, I want to encourage you. I want to remind you of the fact that the Northwest is growing extremely rapidly, and we have a lot of work to do as a church body. We have a lot of work to do. The opportunities here are tremendous, and I gave you a lot of bad news today, and I don't want you to leave here discouraged. I want you to leave here encouraged, because I think we are still in a position where we can affect change. And we as a body of people, with the lordship of, with the fact that Christ is our Lord ahead of us, we can really do a lot of work to affect change in our culture. And so I want you to leave here encouraged. The second thing I want to do for you is to provide you with some resources that may help you. I want to tell you about an organization that I'm a part of. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer for the Evangelical Philosophical Society, and I have an example of the journal that we produce. It's a very fine journal. Most of the articles in this journal will be over your heads. I'll just tell you right off. These are very technical articles, but it's good to read stuff that's over your head. Okay, it's good to stretch yourself intellectually. I have membership applications if you're interested in this. The EPS is a group of evangelicals. There's 700 of us now that are part of this organization, and there's articles that are produced. There are yearly meetings, regional meetings, where people talk about issues related to Christian evangelicalism as it relates to our theology and our philosophy. It's a very fine organization. I want to recommend that to you. The other thing I want to recommend to you is some classes that I'll be teaching that you may find interesting. I'm going to be teaching a class this spring. It actually starts on the 9th of August, entitled Introduction to Critical Thinking. I'm an elder at Edgewood Community Church in Edgewood, Washington. It's a Sunday school class, so there's no charge, so I'm not trying to sell you anything, but it's going to be a class that I think if some of you aren't plugged into a church may be of some help to you. And I can give you some more information on that. We're going to talk about logic. We're going to talk about how to recognize bad arguments, how to formulate good arguments, and to articulate our faith really well. And then in the fall, I'm going to be teaching a class entitled Christian Knowledge, and we're going to be talking about Christian epistemology, which is simply the study of knowledge. And we're going to be looking at what it means to believe. Do you have to have arguments to believe in God? I gave you an example of looking at the orange vest, and I claimed that I knew that, but I didn't have any arguments for it. Can we believe in God in the same way? We're going to talk about the difference between belief and faith and knowledge. What are the distinctions there? So that's another class that may be of help to you. All my classes are taught at the college level, so you'll be required to purchase a textbook and do homework. But I think that the classes will help you to learn something, and you'll leave better equipped to do the work of ministry. All right, that's all I have. I appreciate your attention.
That concludes this program. This material was recorded and produced by Mobile Tape Company Incorporated of Valencia, California. More information about other available media may be obtained by calling 1-800-369-5718 or on our website,